So welcome, everybody. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the February 18th, 2021 webinars for educators from the Making Sense Project. My name is Hillary Hunt. I serve as director of the Making Sense Project. And today on our agenda, we're going to be focusing mostly on anytime offline activities, as well as some additional information for each of you. For those of you who may not be familiar, the Making Sense Project is a partnership between Pennsylvania Department of Education and Penn State University. And it's my pleasure to have Kevin Curry, professor at Penn State, on with us. He is our program partner and it's been a joy to work with. So thanks, Kevin. We're glad that you're here. And these webinars are part of an overall series of financial and economic education initiatives that we offer on behalf of the Pennsylvania Department of Education and Penn State. With these webinars, we always try and meet a variety of different goals. So in some cases, we're trying to enhance content knowledge. In others, we're focusing on financial literacy resources. And in some cases, we're trying to share some professional information. And I think today we're probably going to hit on the second and the third pillar there with some financial literacy resources. And at the end, a little bit of professional information as well. If you haven't had a chance yet, in the chat, if you don't mind introducing yourself, where you're from, the grade level that you teach, what it is that you do. It is always helpful for me if you can list a county in addition to a school district, because not all of us are quite as familiar with all the school district names, so that's always helpful. But thanks again. It's so great to have all of you on. I know everybody is teaching, not just today, but in general, in so many different settings and in so many different ways. Right now, it's, I know, overwhelming for everybody this school year. I'm hoping that at some point, all of us are going to just be able to sort of breathe a collective sigh of relief when we get through this school year. But until then, I just wanted to say that I admire what all of you are doing and getting through and thriving as best as you can. And I appreciate that you're taking this time for yourself, for your own professional development opportunity, and that you're able to spend this time, or that you chose to spend this time with us. I know you have a lot of demands on your time, and it's great to have a lot of familiar faces with us here this afternoon, as well as some new ones, and we're always glad to see new folks. I know in some cases, some of you are new to teaching and or new to teaching personal finance. So we certainly welcome all of you in particular that are sort of diving into this. And I think we can all sort of commiserate with those who are new, especially who are diving into education and are teaching new courses in the midst of the world's most overused phrase, unprecedented times that we're going through right now. So again, continue to introduce if you haven't yet, and feel free to chat with others that you might recognize or what have you one-on-one, and offer feedback and support for each other as we go through. So today's focus is on anytime offline activities, making the most of unplugged education. So when we were putting together this year's season or series of webinars, we wanted to try and do some things that we thought would be of value, both now and going forward. Kevin and I have had some conversations that, everybody is in so many different settings that it's kind of hard to support everyone at once with something that makes sense. So we tried to do some things that we thought would be as useful as possible for as many folks as possible. And I heard from a number of people that you're still looking for some things for a variety of reasons that can be used anytime, and in particular offline. And so that really is the focus here. And when I talk about anytime, I'm in particular talking about anytime in your course or unit on personal finance. So in other words, these 7 activities that we've developed and are making available to you today can be done at any point in your course, at the very beginning, in the middle, at the end. None of them require any previous knowledge, previous instruction, what have you. So The goal of these in particular, with them being able to be used offline, is that they can be used in a whole host of different sort of settings. So say, for example, I know some of you are using a remote instruction day or a flexible instruction day or a virtual learning day or whatever it is that you're calling it. And in some cases, your students are one-to-one and technology is no issue. In some cases, maybe you are trying to send home packets or information of things that can be done offline. Some of you I know are working in hybrid situations, maybe where you have an A group and a B group, and you might be trying to look for something that says, hey, my one group has gotten further ahead. I want to try and get them synchronized. What can I do there? These are some good anytime activities that can be used to try and help maybe sort of, be a gap filler, if you will, for some of those kids. It won't be a make or break deal if some of them don't get it, but if you need to try and fill a gap there, it can work. Also, obviously it's always a good idea to have some emergency subplans, but especially as some of you, maybe are going back into in-person teaching. I know that a number of folks have expressed concern about, what that might look like if they then have to quarantine themselves, and, how are you going to constantly be keeping up with some of those things? So hopefully these activities that we're going to review today can be put into use and be useful to you in whatever makes sense. We are also, I would like to suggest that maybe if you are looking at having students come back to school, and when the weather does allow, I put this one of sitting outside. I don't know about you guys, but I love to be able to go outside. It was like one of those great exciting things when I was a kid, when the teacher said, let's take class outside today. If you are at all able to take kids outside, these are all, paper-based activities, the kind of thing that all they would need is a piece of paper and a pen. And you could certainly, embrace that true anywhere activity, as well as anytime, and being offline. That said, these also have a digital option. So you can deliver these digitally in some cases, or they can be done on a device. But again, these are intended to be able to be done with no connection to the internet. So don't need a device to do it, don't need a device to go and do research or anything else. And you'll see what I mean as we go through these. So speaking of them being digital, Kevin is going to send out a number of links throughout our session here. And the first one is going to be to a Google Drive folder. And this Google Drive folder has a master Google Doc with all of the activities. When you print that out, it's about 33 pages, all of it said and done. And then we broke each of the student handouts for each of the 7 activities into their own Google Doc. I am going to ask, so I love being able to send things out as something that forces people to copy it, but you can't do that with a folder. And I didn't want to have to give everybody 8 different links to these. Please don't ask me for editing rights. I'm asking that instead you go in and make a copy. Rosanna, yes, we will be emailing this, all of these links out afterwards. So if you don't have a chance to grab all of them, don't worry, but I know some people like to be able to access them and start browsing now. So no worries, we will send all of these out afterwards as well. So when you get that folder, you'll be able to go in, you can make a copy of these. You can go in and save them all to your drive, put them wherever it is that you would like to access them, and make them your own. All of these individual activities, there is one that's just all of them in one. So if you wanted to print that and just have those printable ones, you're welcome to. But these also can be copied and pushed out to students through Google Classroom, however you want to use those, really truly make them your own. So hopefully these are user friendly. If there is some other format that you would prefer to get these in, I think by now most of us are comfortable and accustomed to getting things in Google Drive, but if there's some other version that you'd like, don't hesitate to reach out, shoot me an email and let me know. So our 7 activities, these are the titles of them that you'll find. We are going to go through all 7 of them today during our time together to give you an overview and what you can expect, as well as some additional ideas. All of them include just a real short and simple overview. I tried to make the directions for these as simple as possible, so that you could, truly give them to a substitute and, really not have many questions. Okay, so, these are really simple and easy to follow. The student directions on each of the worksheets and handouts should also be very clear and easy to understand. You're also welcome to edit those, obviously, make them your own if you want your students to do something a little bit different. Each of the activities also includes some follow-up activities that can be done. I'm not going to go into great detail because we don't have enough time to talk about all of those for each of these, but I encourage you to take a look at them. So, you assign them, then what next, making them matter and relate to what it is that you're doing. All of them have related Pennsylvania academic standards. So we have aligned to FCS and BCIT in particular. And then because most of these require students to do some writing, they're also aligned to the ELA standards. So I know a lot of you are encouraged to have some cross-curricular connections, so that hopefully will help you in sort of making the case if you need to with any administrators on these. That notion of the KISS principle is really what we tried to follow in developing these. So again, just keep it simple. Okay, these were not intended to be, the world's greatest, most wonderful, fantastic things in the world, but they're good, good, strong, and you can make a good case for using them at any point and not feel like you're just, taking a day off or having students, just fill with fluff. Okay, so they're meaty enough, but hopefully simple enough that they can be picked up by anybody and used. All right, so let's take our first one, which is Money and Me self-evaluation. So, I always like talking about that, personal finance is just that, it's personal, right? And if we're teaching personal finance in a completely academic sense, then we're losing out, both with our students, because obviously we want them to be thinking about their own personal finance and their own personal financial situation, as well as us as educators. Personal finance allows us the opportunity to bring in our own experiences, our own background, and in some cases, some of our own maybe embarrassing stories, and make it personal. And so in this case, this is an opportunity to allow students to sort of reflect on where they are with personal finances and money and sort of their relationship to money. So this is an example of one of those really simple overviews. Students will read a series of statements and determine whether each one applies to them or not. They will select 3 of the statements and explain the responses in more detail. Okay, so this is, as I said, very easy to do. The students are going to see them here on the handout. Does this apply to me? Very well, a little, or not at all? So for example, I feel confident about my ability to manage money. Now, these statements are certainly something, as I mentioned before, that you can take these and make them digital. So for example, just to give you guys a taste of it, I'm going to launch a poll right now, and this is anonymous. So you guys don't need to worry about your answers being seen or me being able to identify these with each of you, but go ahead and answer those. I feel confident about my ability to manage money. That statement describes me very well, a little, not at all. I know exactly how much money I have right now. Sometimes I think that's probably a little harder for us as adults than it is for students. I never feel like I have as much money as I need. I consider myself to be a good saver. I get nervous talking about money with other people. And I'm thinking in particular, like your spouse, significant other, friends, parents, what have you. So these are just the first 5 of the 10 questions that are on this self-evaluation. So it's looking like a lot of you feel confident about your ability to manage money. Good. I would expect that to be the case for most of you, especially those of you who've been doing these with me for a long time. I know exactly how much money I have right now. Good job. So some of you guys are feeling pretty good about that. We joke in my family, well, my husband keeps a monthly net worth statement, and he was a former personal finance teacher and accounting major. So we have this like monthly snapshot. Other people are like, net worth, what is that? I don't know what you're talking about. Some people are more in tune than others. Or you could be thinking about this in terms of, I know exactly how much is in my bank account, right? So you could take this a variety of different ways. I never feel like I have as much money as I need. That's, this is a good one in terms of how folks are feeling about sort of living month to month, or if they feel like they're in a good financial situation and balancing income and expenses. I consider myself to be a good saver. Looks like most of you guys are feeling pretty good about that. I get nervous talking about money with other people. So if some of you, this is all you do all day. So I can understand why a lot of you feel pretty comfortable. I don't know about you, but I'm guessing that would probably look a little bit different with your students, right? So again, this is an example of how to take one of these activities and turn it virtual. I'm not going to do this with all of them. I just wanted to give you guys a sense of, yes, I'm considering them to be offline because you absolutely can give this hard copy worksheet to students and have them complete it. Or you could also turn this into a digital product and use it either in face-to-face instruction or online, for example, as we just did. Same kind of thing, you can have students answer those questions, but then again, pick different ways to respond. So here's another example of how you can turn this, sort of around for in-person facilitation. So for example, does it very well, a little, not at all, having students move around to different locations. They can raise, 3, 2, 1 finger, stand up, sit down, kneel. You can have papers around the room with each of these, and students do things like put their name on it, or you guys ever done one of those activities where everybody gets like sticky dots? High school kids, by the way, still like stickers. If you've got like a supply or you go to the Dollar Tree and you get a bunch of stickers, you can get each student 10 stickers and say, okay, go and put them where they are on each of these, and you can hang, a statement, one of these up around the room, and sort of say, okay, you can get visual representation. So anyhow, there's lots of different ways to do a lot of these kinds of things. So I don't want you to feel like, hey, this is just a bunch of sort of quote unquote boring worksheets. Yes, they can be done again that offline way, but you could also think about some ways to do this. So again, I'm not going to go through this with all of them, but I wanted to make sure and point out that you could think about these in a variety of different ways, should you choose. So if there's any questions, by the way, at any point as we're going along, or comments, feel free to pop those over into the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on those as we go along. So again, they are going to answer those 10 questions, but then we want them to do some self-reflection, right? So explain why each of the statements you selected does or does not apply to you. So we're telling them to do 3. Again, you can make this work for you and your students. Maybe you want them to do 5 of them. That's something that you can completely edit and make that your own. How does this influence your relationship with money? So these are some questions, open-ended questions that can get kids thinking and talking about. This is an example of one of those follow-up activities. So we've got a link to a TED Talk on 6 ways to improve your relationship with money, and some other activities that students could do as well. So again, there's these in all of them. I'm not going to go over the extension activities for each of these because we would unfortunately run out of time. But I'm encouraging all of you to go into that doc and take a look at it. So this next one is on how I spend my money. So this one, I wanted to share with you what the student introduction or the student directions look like. So when was the last time you thought about excuse me, thought about your expenses. Reflecting on how we use our money can help us to think about whether or not we are making wise spending decisions and or determining spending habits we should change. Fill in the chart below with at least 10 recent expenses. Consider both items you purchased as well as money spent on things you experienced or downloaded. By the way, if you are talking about expenses with students, pre-pandemic and now, a lot of times we've always thought about like just the stuff you get, right? But nowadays, a lot of students are paying online for experiences or for downloads, and we don't want to forget those kinds of things. So if they're downloading stuff in video games that they're playing, if they're paying for subscriptions to things like Spotify or what have you, think about all of those kinds of things. And this isn't just necessarily money that they're paying for, but things that are being bought on their behalf. So I know some of you teach older students, some of you have younger students. Maybe they're not spending as much of their own money, but they're asking mom or dad to get different things. So kind of think about it out of the box. How much did it cost? Was it something they needed or just wanted? Did they plan on making this purchase, or was it a spur of the moment kind of thing? So this is an opportunity again for students to reflect and again kind of chart these in a hard copy document. And then we have an opportunity again for some self-reflection, and you'll see that in a lot of these. So consider 3 of the expenses from the log and write a paragraph about each one. How did you pay for it? If you needed to use another payment method, would it have changed your decision? There's a lot of interesting research on the fact that if we are paying with a card or any form of plastic, we're much more likely to spend more, right? So, uh, you know, especially right now, we're post holidays. My kids in particular got a bunch of like Starbucks gift cards and some other different gift cards. Those things seem to like burn a hole in their wallets much more so than cash does. They hold on to cash, but man, they get a $20 gift card at Target, and every time I pass one, we've got to stop. It's crazy. My son had an orthodontist appointment. He took my daughter's, came home and had, brought them home for both of them. So, would it have changed your mind? Would you have still gotten that, that caramel macchiato or whatever if you had had to pay cash? What influenced the decision? Was it just because you wanted it? Was it because you had that gift card? Was it because a friend was getting it? Was it because it was, advertised or you saw it on TikTok? What made you do it, right? Do you feel good about this decision to spend money, or do you wish you'd made a different choice? By the way, going back to that spending decision and what influenced you, another interesting question to ask nowadays with students is, what is the influence of social media on your spending decisions? I will confess, we bought into this whole tortilla hack thing. Did anybody see those from TikTok? With like the thing where you fold the thing into 4 quarters. Anybody get sucked into that? Okay, maybe. Okay, thank you, Amy, for saying yes. I don't feel like I'm as alone. I've been debating whether or not I'm going to get the feta to make the feta spaghetti or pasta bake thing, and it is one of those silly things that it's a trend, it's trending. My kids are seeing it. They've got me trying now to watch TikTok, anyhow, whole nother subject for another day, but it influences your spending decisions. I would never have gone out and bought feta to make a baked feta thing until seeing it there. And, of course, we're always looking for just some interesting things to do around here. Oh, what is it? So you take a circle, you take your tortilla and you basically think of it in like 4 different quadrants. So say, for example, you want to do it like a pizza tortilla, you would do some like some sauce, some maybe pepperoni, some cheese, what have you, and then you cut it only up like 1 radius, and then you flip it over, flip it over, flip it over again, so it's like in quarters, so it's a wedge, and then you can put it on like a griddle or in a pan and heat it up. And if you Google TikTok tortilla hack or just tortilla hack, you'll see a ton of them. any of you who are FCS teachers, they would make for a great little a lab in an FCS classroom. So anyhow, so what's influencing you? What is making you do it? Is it, and how much did you think about that spending decision before making it? Do you feel like you spent too much or too little? Did you spend the right amount of time? So one of the standards actually at the national level in from the Council on Economic Education around personal finance, around financial literacy has to do with how much time we spend thinking about spending decisions. And that obviously the bigger the expense, the more time we should spend thinking about it. So that also just leads to another interesting conversation about, do you need to think about every single expense that you make or just the ones that really matter? But then at the same time, how much do those little expenses over time add up? And maybe you should think about those, or especially about things that are habitual. So these can lead to some really interesting conversations. This next one about goals is really about creating a vision board. And I think this one is fun. Actually, my 7th grader I was mentioning recently asked me to get her a poster board at Dollar Tree when we were there. And she had decided that with the new year, she wanted to create her own vision board all on her own. And I thought, oh, this is great. And so these are fun. You can do them in a digital format if you want your students to. If you're not familiar with vision boards, you can have them include things like a place to live, the vehicle they'd want to drive, things about family or friends, relationships, jobs, activities, what have you. These are some examples. If you do just a simple Google image search, you'll come up with lots of different examples out there. There are also some great examples out there for digital ones. So again, offline or online, you can use things like, for example, and there's also YouTube videos about how to do them. So again, there's lots of stuff out there if you want to dig into them. But you can easily do this like in slides or in Canva. You could have students do a Pinterest board. There's lots of different ways to do this. But the key to this then is, how does that relate to your finances? And, sort of this notion of financial goals and financial goal setting. And, how does that all interact and connect? I'm going to pause for a second and see if anybody, has anybody ever done a vision board activity with their students? Has anybody ever done one of those? Put a little note in the chat. Okay. I see one, they call it I am. Yep, doing yours digitally now. I've seen some students that are some teachers that have done this at the beginning of their personal finance class and have then left them up sort of throughout the year as kind of a reminder. And I think that's kind of neat. If your students were to do them on something like Canva, they could easily export them out as a PDF, and you could print them as well, so that you can have a digital turned paper-based copy. And those of you who have not used Canva, I could spend a whole hour just talking about how much I love Canva. I truly have an obsession with it. If you haven't spent time with it, I apologize now for sending you down that rabbit hole. Plan to just, set some time aside in front of the TV and enjoy that one. But yeah, you could use Google Slides. There's all sorts of different things that you could use to make that work. So it's a fun one, and I think that you can make this work for just about any age of students. So oh man, spraying the rooms with disinfectant. Maybe you'd have to put them in page protectors or laminate them. I'll have to think about that. But yeah, and then good old fashioned paper, scissors, and glue works too. It's the one challenge. I remember one of my kids had to do something a while ago, and I'm like, yeah, we don't really get magazines anymore. We used to be able to cut stuff out of magazines, and that just isn't something we really have laying around the house anymore. All right, so this next one is called my Moneography, and a number of you have been with me in a good number of sessions in the past. Does anybody remember, this is like a little quiz digging back in your brain, does anybody remember what I refer to when I talk about the CASE method of education, CASE? And this isn't somebody like George Case. It stands for something. Anybody out there remember what I have said the case method stands for before? So the case method comes from, yep, what was that? Was that Fred?
No, it was Jim.
Oh, let me hear you again.
It was Jim. Copy and steal everything.
You got it, Jim. That's right. Copy and steal everything. My favorite acronym in education. This is from the very first time that I went to a professional development program as a brand new teacher. I was in Newport News, Virginia, sitting in a big old high school cafeteria with every other math educator in the district. And she was using overhead transparencies and had a transparency that had this on it. And anyhow, at that same exact time, we were talking about actually getting kids to write in math. And the presenter was talking about having students write what she called their mathography. So in this case, I have blatantly copied and stolen this idea and shifted it over. So I not only I cased from the exact same session where I learned the case method. So anyhow, this is like really digging back. But the idea of this is to have students write sort of their own moneyography. And what is interesting about this idea, and I embrace this as a math educator, because when it comes to math, for example, and I taught 8th grade, and everybody sort of came to math with their own kind of like preconceived notions about whether or not they're good at it, whether or not they like it or not. And I think a lot of people come to personal finance in the same way. You know, it makes them nervous, or they feel confident, or they don't feel confident. And so having students sort of write about how they feel about this has a lot of benefits, I think, both for the students in terms of being reflective, but also for you as their educator. And so in this one, basically students are just sort of writing like an autobiographical piece called My Moneyography, right? So we are providing them with some different questions that they can answer to help, sort of prompt this. You can, if you want, just have students go through and answer each of these questions, or you can have them use these questions and just, write sort of like an essay. So you can choose how you want to do this. But, do you think of yourself as being good at handling your money? Explain that. What do you think you could still improve on? Do you feel like talking about money, or how do you feel talking about money with family members or loved ones? Are those conversations easy or challenging? If they're challenging, what makes it that way? And this is a great opportunity for that self-reflection piece to say, okay, now that I've talked about, or, put into writing, like, where I am now, where do you want to be? Like, do you want these things to continue? You could also make some really strong connections between this and kind of that notion of growth mindset, right? Like, I may not be good at this yet, right? So like, I'm not a good saver yet. And that power of thinking about how, this is an evolving type of thing. And to me, this was really insightful for students, like, for example, I had in particular girls who just thought they couldn't be good at math. My mom's not good at math. My dad's not good at math. So how could I be good at math, right? Like, they kind of had that internal dialogue in their head. And so being able to read things like this was incredibly helpful in, kind of getting inside their heads and knowing where they were on these types of things. So curious, over in the chat, has anybody ever had their students write anything like this before? If so, how have you used it? Or how do you think you might be able to use this kind of information, if students were to answer these questions? So what do you think? What would you gain as an educator? Would you read them? Hopefully you would. Reading them, what kind of insight? Or if you were to ask these questions, what do you think that would tell you about your students. Give everybody a second to reply over in the chat. Yeah, definitely a great way to hit some of the writing standards. Good. So quite a few of you are saying that you definitely would want to use this. Good idea to get them to start thinking about it. Yeah, I love that one, Rosanna. Talking about them rereading them a few years later might be even more important. Yeah, sort of that letter to themselves. Great. So yeah, so definitely thinking about how you could use those, you know, to inform maybe some of what you teach about, and you know how your students are, maybe where they're coming from, in terms of their experiences with finances. Um, and I think it's interesting. That's a great point, Fred. Knowing the students and their parent interaction. Yeah, and a lot of times, you know, students might volunteer information about like what, you know, their experiences are, sort of, you know, in class. But you also a lot of times will get more out of students if they have the opportunity to write about it privately, you know, in an assignment like this, as opposed to raising their hands and sharing something. You might sort of, you know, learn a little bit more, get a little bit more insight in this environment. So moving on to the next one, this is another kind of like a to-do checklist kind of deal, but this one is done, doing, will do. And so students review a list of actions and consider whether or not they've done them in the past or doing them now or will do them in the future. And this is a little different than that first one that I showed you, but similar in terms of the format. They'll then pick some of them afterwards to discuss their experience and or plan going forward. And again, you can modify this as you think you need to. So important in this is for you, I think, as the educator in particular on this one, is this the best list of actions for your students to be selecting from? So maybe you need to adjust this. So this is one of those that I would probably really encourage you to look at before you use it, and maybe modify it, especially depending on the age of your students. If you've got younger students, some of these, you know, they might have a lot of, you know, ones who've not done them. So I guess is their experience specifically with personal finance tasks, opening a different, you know, different kinds of checking accounts, use an ATM machine to get cash, downloaded the app from their financial institution, set up direct deposit of a pay. Next one is a completely generic activity that can be used, again, we talked about anytime, in terms of where you are in the curriculum, that is more tied to the content that you're doing, but it can be used at any point that you so choose. So in this one, you know, I'm sure a lot of you guys have played the game or heard of the game. Lots of times it's used like as a warm-up icebreaker kind of thing, 2 truths and a lie. So everybody shares 3 statements. So I might tell you that I'm, you know, left-handed. I was born in California and I love to mountain bike. And you would have to figure out which one of those is not true. So if anybody wants to try and guess which of those 3 is not true, over in the comments, you're welcome to guess. Left-handed, born in California, or love to mountain bike. You can take your guess. But in this case, you're asking students to come up with statements that are aligned to what you're teaching. Okay, so you want them to come up with 3 sets of 3. So in each set, they're going to come up with 3 statements. 2 of them have to be true, and 1 of them has to be false. Right. So encourage them to be creative, but think about like what are the what do people really think about things? What would, you know, kind of try and trick your fellow classmates, right? So in this case, you know, students would fill them all out, and then they also, so it's kind of like a blank version, and then they make their own answer key. So in the answer key, under the true statement, they have to share like what's the source of that fact, right? Like maybe it's X percentage of people have never checked their credit report, and they would share, you know, where they found that statistic. Or maybe it's just, you know, something that they learned in class, right? And under the fault statement, they need to say, why do you think everybody else, why do you think your fellow classmates will pick this one? So I think this is kind of fun. Again, you can use it with anything. You can choose to have students just do whatever it is that you've been studying right now. You could make it more of a review kind of thing from like the whole year and say, you can pick any topic that we've covered, or you might say, hey, you're gonna do ones on related to maybe like budgeting. You guys are gonna do ones related to savings. You guys are gonna do some related to credit, what have you. You can think about these in a variety of different ways. You can also then take what they have created and use them in a lot of different ways. So, for example, you might use them as like a bell ringer activity, or even as a ticket out the door, or as a review for something. You can have students swap with each other and then actually have to answer. So, by the way, there are, let's see, I saw 2 of you that got the right answer. So ding, ding, ding. Good job, Crystal and Fred. So I was in fact born in California, total Navy brat here, born at the Naval Hospital in Balboa. I am left-handed, hence the reason I'm gesticulating that way, although I do use my right hand for my mouse. But I don't mountain bike because, truth be told, I actually never learned how to ride a bicycle. So it's that one's love to mountain bike makes more sense than the true one, which is never learned how to ride a bicycle, because who would ever have not learned, right? But yeah, so there's my true confession for the day. So good job. I apologize. I don't have any great prizes to give away, but good job of those to those of you guys who figured that one out. And again, these are fun. You can have students, sort of, change those. But again, I like the whole notion of like, how are you stumping folks? And then last but not least, this is my favorite of the activities. And this is the one that I think you can really dive into and do some kind of interesting and meaty work with. And I have to give credit for this one. Interestingly enough, and let me just pull it up because I want to make sure that I pull up the right one. So one of the webinars that we have coming up later is going to be on podcasts, financial podcasts. So I've been listening to different podcasts, which I already do, but I was broadening my repertoire and listening to some that I hadn't. So anyhow, I listened to this podcast called How to Money. And I was like, oh man, this would be great. Except that apparently it's these 2 young guys, and apparently they drink a different craft beer in every episode. So I was like, okay, so I probably can't have you guys have your kids listen to this. But they did this excellent podcast on gender stereotypes and money. And it was really funny because they were like, okay, it's these 2 young guys, and they're like, how are we going to do this without completely stepping in it? And it was just really kind of interesting. And I was like, man, this would just be really fascinating, I think, to use in class. And again, sort of following up on that whole like my moneography, people sort of have these like ingrained notions about themselves, but also about, different people. And so this activity actually is based on some surveys that have been done, or some different like sort of research and statistics, in which case most of them, sort of lean towards, being done more or less by males or females, but then draws out some conversation. So in this one, here's the overview. Students consider the role of gender stereotypes as they relate to money. They read a series of statements and decide if they apply more to men or to women. They select 3 of the statements to share why they answered the way they did, and then they answer some open-ended questions. So again, this is one of those where you definitely need to preview all of these and decide how you want to talk about these. I think some of these could open up some really interesting conversations. This is the only one that kind of has quote unquote right or wrong answers, only based on what the statistics show. So obviously if somebody thinks that it's stereotypical of the, of one or the other, that's the stereotype they have in their head. So it's not necessarily right or wrong. It's just that this has some factual information at the end to help lead you through discussion. So out of curiosity, how many of you think, and let's just, pose these. I did not make a poll out of these. I probably should have. Which one of these do you think men or women are less likely to ask for a raise? Who do you think is less likely to ask for a raise, men or women? Yep. So men, so the preponderance of answers was women. And so yes. And a great question. How do folks handle this lesson with gender with our students in the LGBTQ plus community? Absolutely a absolutely valid question. I think I would probably preface it with the fact that most survey mechanisms and data collection traditionally ask and allow individuals to respond by one of two genders. It's how the Census Bureau and others have done it. And so I would say, I would just acknowledge it and say it's an imperfect science. And obviously there's a lot of other sort of pieces and parts that are wrapped up in all of this. And I think it could also sort of broaden that whole notion of stereotypes in general and what stereotypes do and don't do. You can get into just sort of and introduce it even just from the whole notion of like, is it right that we have, an aisle at Target that's filled with nothing but pink stuff and another aisle that's filled with nothing but blue stuff? And, at what point do kids start to learn about, stereotypes for genders? I think you could get into a lot of issues with this. Again, I think this one's going to depend on how you can, on your comfort level and your ability to know your students and how to walk through some of this with them and what some of those key issues might be. But this is sort of that notion of recognizing that there are these stereotypes and whether or not they're right or wrong or good or bad. And we get through some of these as we go through, in particular, I think ones where some folks might be surprised by some of the answers. So who do you think has higher credit scores? This actually is the one trick question. And you would see that in the answer key because they're off by 1 point. So there is a trick question in there that you may or may not have expected. So spend more on vehicle purchases. The answer on that one is men. Worry more about retirement. The answer on that one tends to be women. More likely to buy a home if single. So this comes from statistics on what home buyers, the married couples, what have you. There's just all sorts of different stuff in that. So anyhow, so they answer all those and then they pick 3 of the statements and talk about them. And then I pulled this quote. And there's more to this and I linked to the source and I linked to some other resources in this one. Men often receive direct and indirect messages that they should be the breadwinner in a heterosexual relationship. These messages emphasize the stereotypes that men should be powerful, strong, autonomous, and aggressive, and assertiveness is rewarded. Conversely, women are often socialized to avoid conflict and put other people's needs before their own. To seek cooperation and harmony, women are steered away from traits such as assertiveness that are traditionally thought to be masculine. This means the way women and men approach money may be different. And so I point out that these come from an organization in Australia and ask, do you think the same issues are present here in the United States? Why or why not? And so again, you could pose these questions. And again, you have the ability to adapt, these open-end questions however you like. The other one is specific to how do you think gender stereotypes might impact financial education? Do you think, for example, that more males or females maybe are encouraged to take the course by either a guidance counselor or by their parents? Do you think that it plays out in the classroom in any way? There's lots of different directions that you can go in this in terms of whether or not the lessons should be the same for everybody or if they should be different. So a lot of different places that you can go with this. I would be really curious if anybody uses these all of these, but this one in particular, I would love to get some feedback on how it goes. With any and all of these, if you're using them and you think, hey, I made this modification, I think other teachers, might find value in it, please, shoot me an email and say, hey, I used this and this is what I did. I tweaked this, I did that. I intend for this to be a living document so we can continue to, adjust it. And make improvements based on what you guys come up with and share back to me. So, and again, all of these have some additional follow-up activities, and this one in particular has some interesting reports. There's one, I want to say it's from Fidel that I linked to. Actually, no. I think I ended up with the one from US Bank because it was the most current, with some really good statistics around, in particular, sort of women in finance. And but the Australia link that I linked to, there's some good stuff there. There's also some fascinating pieces on and in some different places that you can go. Like, for example, what does it do to someone when, say, a male and a female walk into a car dealership and the salesman automatically starts talking to the guy? Or you could say, who do you think a male and female couple walk into a car dealership, a male associate comes out, who do you think they talk to first? Right? You can just, and what does that do? Right? And so, just there's a lot that you could do with this. I think that's sort of interesting. And ideally, you'd like folks to realize that, and you could have students, reflect on themselves. Do they fit the stereotypes or not? Do they think that the stereotypes are warranted or not? What influence does it have on how they've viewed the role of men and or women in their relationship to money? So much that you can do with this. So I'd encourage you all to dive in. And as I said, each one of these then in the discussion guides, this one's a little bit different than the rest. I give you a link, I give you a source to where that statistic came from, and then I have a question that you could pose in response. So why do you think women ask for raises less than men? What do you think the impact is on women that nearly 65% of financial articles in women's magazines categorize them as excessive spenders? What message is that sending? Who do you think spends more on takeout food? Why do you think men tend to spend more? And does that get at even some additional stereotypes that maybe men aren't as good in the kitchen? Well, men are just as good at cooks as women. So really you can drill down in so many different ways. And so for each of those statistics, there's an additional follow-up question that, again, you can, if you were to push this out and have them do it offline, what have you, and maybe if you're hybrid, this is a good use of the day that they're at home while you have another group in class. Some of you I know are doing both at the same time. God bless you. But if you're alternating, this might be something that you can do. So again, they're all standards aligned. Hopefully that'll help you in any validation that you need to do with administrators or just to align with your standards. The only one that you're going to have to sort of do DIY on is that 2 truths and a lie. So say, for example, you assign it for credit, then obviously you align it to the associated standards. But the rest of them are all aligned for you. So I would love it I'm going to use our last 5 minutes here to review some other additional opportunities. But I would love it if you would post in the chat how you think you might use some of these activities. If there's one that really seems like you're kind of feeling compelled to try, or sort of how you think you might use them. Keep them on file as a just in case, put them in your sub-plan folder kind of thing. What do you think you might do with them? So feel free to share that.